He signed the papers without hesitation. One signature. One clean stroke of ink. The room exhaled as if it had been waiting for it. Men in dark suits nodded. Phones buzzed quietly. Somewhere behind him, a door closed with soft finality. Alessandro DeLuca didn't look up right away. He already knew what it cost. The office was silent in the way powerful rooms always were. No wasted noise, no unnecessary movement. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city his family had ruled for generations. Lights burned below like something alive. His empire, earned, defended, paid for. And still his chest felt hollow. Across the table sat his uncle, calm and satisfied. "It's done," the man said. Not proudly. Definitively. "You're next in line now." Alessandro nodded once. Controlled. Disciplined. The way he'd trained himself to be. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and accepted the weight that settled on his shoulders like a crown made of iron. No one mentioned her name. They didn't have to. Sofia Romano had not been in the room when the decision was made. She hadn't begged or argued. She hadn't even known it was coming. That was part of what made it possible. Love was easier to abandon when it wasn't watching you do it. Years later, the city spoke Alessandro's name with caution. Doors opened before he reached them. Conversations died when he entered a room. Men who had once tested him now lowered their eyes. He moved through the world untouched, unchallenged, exactly as he had planned. But some nights, when the city quieted and the power stopped demanding his attention, Alessandro remembered the version of himself who had once believed love could coexist with legacy. That man was gone. Or so he thought. The call came on an ordinary evening. Too ordinary to matter. Until it did. A name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years slid into the air between him and his lieutenant like a blade wrapped in silk. "Sofia Romano," the man said carefully. "She's back." Alessandro didn't react. Not outwardly. But something inside him fractured. Slow, silent, irreversible. Because power had taught him how to survive anything except the one thing he'd never truly buried. And now, the woman he ruined his future for was standing close enough to remind him exactly what he'd lost. The night Alessandro left, the city smelled like rain and old stone. Sofia stood by the window of the small apartment they'd shared for less than a year. Her arms folded loosely, as if she were holding herself together by habit alone. She didn't turn when he entered. She already knew the weight of his footsteps. Knew the pause before he spoke. Knew, somehow, that this wasn't another argument they could soften with time. "You're late," she said quietly. "I had family business." She nodded, still not facing him. That word, family, had been widening the distance between them for months. Every whispered phone call. Every meeting that ran too long. Every look in his eyes that said he was somewhere else, calculating things she wasn't meant to understand. He set his coat down carefully. Too carefully. As if order might make this easier. "They made their decision," he said. Sofia finally turned. Her face was calm, but her eyes were alert now, sharp with a fear she refused to name. "And what does that mean for us?" Alessandro didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, stopping just short of her. Close enough to feel the warmth she gave off, far enough not to reach for her. He had learned that hesitation was a kind of mercy. "It means I can't live this life halfway anymore," he said. "Not if I want to survive it." Her breath caught, subtle but unmistakable. "So I'm the halfway." The question landed cleanly. No accusation. Just truth. He swallowed. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Imagined himself colder, more decisive. But standing there, with the woman who knew his tells and his silences, the words felt heavier than any threat he'd ever faced. "If I choose you," he said, "I put you in danger. If I choose them, I lose you." Sofia laughed once, a small broken sound. "You already chose," she said. "You just want me to forgive you for it." He reached for her then, instinct overriding discipline, but she stepped back. The space between them hardened. Say it, she said. Say you're leaving. Alessandro's jaw tightened. This was the moment his uncle had warned him about. The cost that couldn't be negotiated. The part of power that demanded something precious in exchange. I'm leaving, he said. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Sofia nodded slowly, as if memorizing him. Then don't come back, she said. Don't look for me when the crown gets heavy. Don't pretend this was love sacrificed for duty. This was ambition. That cut deeper than any blade. He wanted to argue, to explain, to promise things he knew he couldn't keep. Instead, he picked up his coat and walked to the door. He didn't look back. The door closed softly behind him, sealing the choice that would build an empire, and break something in him that power would never quite replace. Alessandro DeLuca woke before dawn, as he always did, long before the city remembered how to breathe. The penthouse was silent, wrapped in glass and stone, suspended above streets that bent to his name. From the bedroom windows, the lights of the city still glimmered faintly, obedient even in sleep. He stood there for a moment, shirtless, hands resting on the cool glass, watching a world that moved only because men like him allowed it to. Control was not loud. It was precise. By the time the sun crested the horizon, Alessandro had already reviewed shipments, approved punishments, spared one life and ended another with a single nod. His men spoke carefully around him, measuring their words, reading his silences. No one interrupted him without reason. No one questioned his decisions twice. This was the order he had built. In the conference room, his uncle sat across from him, older now, slower but still sharp. The Russians are testing the southern routes, the man said. They won't push if they think you're watching. They know I'm watching, Alessandro replied. His voice was calm, unhurried. They're checking if I still care. And do you? Alessandro met his gaze. Enough. The meeting ended as it always did. Efficiently, decisively. Doors opened for him. Men moved aside. Respect followed him like a shadow that never strayed too far. Yet as he crossed the marble floors, a familiar emptiness pressed against his ribs. Power had given him everything he was promised. Wealth without limit. Loyalty bought and earned. Enemies who spoke his name only behind closed doors. He ate when he wished, slept when he chose, trusted no one completely. At night, the city below pulsed with life he no longer touched. Women had come and gone, beautiful, careful, temporary. None asked him questions that mattered. None stayed long enough to learn the difference between his silences. That had been the rule. He poured himself a drink as evening settled in, the amber liquid catching the light. The reflection in the glass showed a man perfectly composed, perfectly alone. He lifted it, then stopped. For a moment, uninvited, a memory surfaced. Sofia, barefoot in their old kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot she never measured. Her laughter when he stole a taste. The way she looked at him then, not with fear, not with calculation, but with certainty. He set the glass down untouched. Peace, he had learned, was not the absence of chaos. It was the presence of something worth protecting. And for all his control, Alessandro had built a kingdom with nothing inside it that could survive him. When his phone buzzed on the counter, sharp and sudden, he expected numbers, names, threats. Instead, it was a single message from his lieutenant. She's in the city. Alessandro closed his eyes just once. The king remained standing. But the quiet he ruled fractured, and for the first time in years, control felt like something that could slip. Alessandro did not ask for confirmation. He stared at the city from the same window where dawn had found him hours earlier, his phone heavy in his hand. She's in the city. 4 words that should have meant nothing after all these years. 4 words that loosened something he had sealed shut with discipline and time. Fear. The name surfaced without effort, as if it had never left. He told himself he would not go looking for her. That if fate wanted to test him, it would have to do better than a rumor passed through cautious mouths. He had buried that part of his life with intention. Love had been a liability then. It was still supposed to be. Yet by evening, his driver took a familiar route without being told. The cafe sat on a narrow street near the river, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. Smaller than he remembered. Warmer. Human. Alessandro remained in the car across the street, watching people come and go, telling himself this was surveillance, not longing. Then the door opened and she stepped out. Time did not stop. But it faltered. Sofia Romano wore her hair shorter now, just brushing her shoulders. She moved with a quiet assurance that made her seem taller, steadier. There was no hesitation in her steps, no searching glance for permission. She laughed at something the woman beside her said, the sound unguarded, familiar enough to hurt. She looked intact, not untouched by life but shaped by it. Stronger where she had once been soft. Her face had lines now, subtle ones, earned rather than stolen. She was not the girl he left behind. And yet she was unmistakably her. Alessandro's chest tightened, sharp and sudden. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways over the years. Anger, tears, accusation. He had prepared for her to look at him with bitterness, with ruin. He had not prepared for indifference. Sofia passed the car without slowing, unaware of the man behind the tinted glass who had once sworn he would come back for her. Alessandro did not move, did not speak. Control rooted him to the seat while something reckless strained against it. For years, he had told himself she was a chapter that closed because it had to. That some losses were necessary. That no one person was irreplaceable. Watching her walk away, he understood how thoroughly he had lied. There had been women since. Many. None who unsettled him with a single glance. None who existed outside his power. None who made him feel as though the ground beneath his certainty could tilt. Sofia disappeared into the crowd, and the street swallowed her whole. Alessandro exhaled slowly. For the first time since becoming a king, he felt something dangerously close to fear. Not of enemies or betrayal, but of the truth he could no longer avoid. He had not replaced her because he never wanted to. And now that she was back, the life he had built without her suddenly felt provisional, as if it had all been standing on borrowed ground. Sofia recognized him before he spoke. Not because of the car or the men stationed discreetly nearby, but because the air changed. The way it always had when Alessandro DeLuca entered a room and expected it to bend around him. She finished stirring her coffee, unhurried, and took a measured sip before lifting her eyes. He stood a few feet away, impeccably dressed, posture relaxed in the way that came from knowing no one would challenge him. The years had sharpened him. Broader shoulders, harder lines, but the stillness was the same. Controlled. Watchful. "Ciao, Sofia," he said. She set the cup down gently. "You shouldn't say my name like that," she replied. "It sounds like you still own it." Something flickered across his face before discipline smoothed it away. "May I sit?" She gestured to the empty chair without warmth. "If you need to." He sat. The cafe continued around them, ordinary and oblivious. Place untouched by fear or reputation. Alessandro had chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground. Or so he thought. "I heard you were back," he said. "I live here," she answered. "That usually comes with being back." A corner of his mouth twitched, unused to being disarmed so easily. "You look well." "So do you," she said, then added. "Power agrees with men like you." It wasn't a compliment. He studied her, waiting for something. Resentment, curiosity, acknowledgement of what he had become. Sofia met his gaze without flinching, her expression calm, almost detached. "You're not angry," he observed quietly. "I was," she said. "Years ago." Anger burns hot, Alessandro. Then it gets tired. "That's all you have to say to me." His voice stayed level, but something brittle edged beneath it. She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "What were you expecting?" "Fear." "Gratitude that you noticed me again." "I expected honesty." "You don't get to ask for that," she replied evenly. You forfeited it when you walked away without looking back. A man at a nearby table laughed loudly. Someone dropped a spoon. Life went on. Alessandro felt the weight of his name pressing uselessly against the space between them. In his world, silence followed his words. Here it meant nothing. I made choices, he said. Yes, Sofia agreed. And so did I. His brow furrowed. Leaving wasn't easy. She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. No one said it was. But you didn't choose what was hard. You chose what made you feel safe. The words landed with precision, no accusation needed. He straightened, instinctively reaching for authority. You don't know what it took to build what I have. She stood, gathering her coat. I know exactly what it took. That's why I don't admire it. For a moment, Alessandro forgot how to respond. Sofia paused, meeting his gaze one last time. Whatever you are out there, she said softly, doesn't matter in here. Not to me. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him seated at a small cafe table. His power intact and completely irrelevant. Silence followed her longer than her words had. Alessandro remained at the table after Sofia left, the chair across from him empty, the coffee cooling untouched. He was used to silence obeying him, to rooms holding their breath. This one didn't. It moved on without him, indifferent. That night, he returned to his estate and found the walls louder than any confrontation. The marble floors echoed his steps. The guards nodded. Doors opened. Everything functioned perfectly. Nothing answered him. He poured a drink and didn't raise it. Sofia's voice replayed instead. Steady, unsentimental. You chose what made you feel safe. The truth of it pressed in from every direction. He had called his departure mercy, protection, necessity, words that sounded noble when spoken aloud and hollow when left alone. He remembered the night he told her he was leaving, the careful distance he kept, as if proximity might weaken his resolve. He remembered how she listened without interrupting, how she nodded once, slowly, like someone absorbing a physical blow. She hadn't begged. That had made it easier. And worse. He had told himself her silence meant understanding. Now he knew better. Silence had been her way of surviving what he refused to face. The drink stayed on the table as Alessandro moved to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, obedient and bright. He had shaped it with deals and threats, with patience sharpened into fear. Every street carried his influence. Every outcome bent eventually. Except this. His phone buzzed. Routine update. Shipment cleared. Problem resolved. He dismissed it without reading further. The machinery of his life continued to turn, efficient and unfeeling. For the first time, he wondered how many moments he had mistaken for peace simply because no one challenged him. Sofia had not raised her voice. She hadn't accused him of ruining her life. She hadn't asked for anything. That was the cruelty of it. Her calm had stripped away his defenses more thoroughly than rage ever could. She had built a life where his presence was optional. The thought unsettled him more than any threat. He sat heavily, the weight of years settling into his bones. The empire he had constructed demanded constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. He had paid in time, in blood, in sleep. But the debt he felt now was different. Older, quieter, compounding. Unspoken resentment had a way of fermenting. It grew in the gaps where apologies should have been, in the space between what was said and what was meant. He had filled those gaps with power and told himself they were sealed. They weren't. Alessandro closed his eyes, breathing slowly, deliberately, the way he did before making irreversible decisions. For years, silence had protected him. Now it was asking to be answered. The knock at the door was soft but deliberate. Alessandro didn't move at first, letting it echo twice before he spoke. Enter. Sofia stepped inside, the faint scent of her perfume cutting through the stale air of his office. She didn't glance at the awards, the art, the empire sprawled behind him. She looked at him. directly, like she had been doing all along. "You have a lot of explanations," she said, voice even. Not accusatory, not angry, just present. Alessandro poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light. "I have nothing to explain that you wouldn't already understand." She let the words sit. Then she leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. "You call leaving me necessary. You call abandoning everything that could have been strength." Her eyes didn't waver. "But it wasn't strength, Alessandro. It was fear. Fear of choosing love over power. Fear of losing yourself." He tightened his grip on the glass, the leather of his chair creaking under the pressure. "I did what I had to do. For the family. For the empire. For you," she corrected quietly, and it landed heavier than a gunshot. "For you, not anyone else. You traded me for control. You told yourself it was protection. But it wasn't. It was survival at my expense." The truth in her words gnawed at him. He had rehearsed this confrontation for years, anticipated anger, guilt, tears. Not this calm, unflinching indictment. No storm to fight against. Just the quiet, undeniable judgment of the one person who had mattered more than everything else. "You don't get it," he said, voice low, almost pleading. "Everything I built, everything I sacrificed, it was supposed to secure us, to protect us." Sofia shook her head. "You protected yourself. You left me to learn how to survive without you. You became untouchable. But untouchable isn't the same as unbroken. You made your choice, Alessandro. And now you live with it." He felt the walls of his office close in. The empire he had prided himself on, the life he had meticulously controlled, suddenly seemed like a cage he had built for one. "You think I came here to forgive you?" she asked softly, almost rhetorical. "No. I came here to make sure you hear this. You chose this. Every deal, every threat, every corner of fear and respect you command. It didn't erase what you lost. And it won't." Her eyes pierced him with the weight of everything he had ignored. Every memory, every moment of tenderness sacrificed, every silence he had mistaken for peace. Alessandro set the glass down, unsteady for the first time in years. He wanted to argue, justify, to call it necessary again. But the words stuck in his throat. She had stripped them away. Laid bare the truth he had buried beneath authority and control. "You chose this," she repeated, and walked toward the door. He stayed behind the desk, watching her leave, feeling the weight of the crown that had cost him more than power could ever measure. Alessandro sat in the dim light of his office long after Sofia's footsteps had faded down the hallway. The city outside pulsed with life. Sirens, engines, distant laughter, but none of it reached him. The empire he had built, the network of obedience and fear, felt hollow tonight. Every decision, every sacrifice he had glorified in his mind, now pressed down on him like chains. He poured another glass, the liquid trembling slightly in his hand, though his body remained rigid. For years, he had worn the crown of authority as armor, the sharp edge of power protecting him from the vulnerability he feared. But stripped of pretense, stripped of the excuses he had repeated to himself in every quiet moment, he saw himself clearly for the first time. He was not the untouchable king he had imagined. He was a man who had abandoned love, who had chosen ambition over the one person who had understood him. The strength he flaunted, the respect he commanded, it was all built on absence, on the shadow of what he had left behind. Alessandro ran a hand over his face, feeling the years etched into the skin, the decisions carved into his posture. He thought of Sofia, of the way she had looked at him. Not with fear, not with longing, but with a kind of clarity that made every lie he had told himself crumble. She didn't need him to be powerful. She didn't even need him to explain. She only needed him to see himself, and he had finally done that. He thought back to the nights of solitude he had filled with strategy, with control, with money and influence. They had never quieted the echo of her absence. The empire could protect him from enemies, from betrayal, from death, but it could not shield him from himself. The glass on the desk trembled again as he set it down, the amber liquid catching the dim light like fragments of memory. He thought of every moment he had justified, every decision he had dressed as necessity. The crown had not made him strong. It had made him distant, untouchable, untethered from the one anchor that had truly mattered. A deep sigh escaped him, though it felt foreign, almost impossible. The man beneath the crown was not the one everyone else saw. The man beneath was fractured, guilty, and achingly human. He had traded tenderness for dominance, connection for command, and for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had lost, not as a lesson, not as regret, but as reality. Alessandro rose from the chair, moving toward the window. The city lights reflected in his eyes, but he no longer looked at them with pride. He looked at them with the quiet understanding of someone who had learned that control was nothing without conscience, and power was meaningless without heart. Tonight, the king remained in his office. But the man beneath the crown, he was awakening. And for the first time in years, he didn't look away from the reflection staring back at him. Alessandro didn't hear the knock the first time. He was still staring at the window, tracing the maze of streets below, each light a reminder of every choice he had made. The knock came again, soft, deliberate, and he turned, his chest tightening before his mind caught up. Sofia stepped into the office, her presence unannounced but unmistakable. No fear, no hesitation, only the quiet certainty that had always unnerved him more than any rival ever could. She didn't glance at the empire spread across the room, the ledgers, the monitors, the phones lined with contacts ready to act on his command. She looked at him, directly. "You've built a kingdom," she said, her voice calm, carrying none of the heat he might have expected. "And yet, you're alone in it." Her words weren't an accusation. They were a reckoning. Alessandro's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, started to speak, but found no justification that could survive the weight of her gaze. I did what I had to," he said finally, the usual defense sounding hollow even to him. She shook her head slowly. "You didn't protect anyone but yourself. You think the cost was worth it, but you've been paying it every day, without knowing it." Alessandro's hands curled into fists at his sides. For years he had measured risk, reward, loyalty, power. He had assumed the price of his ambition would be external. Enemies eliminated, rivals subdued, threats silenced. He had never considered that the price might come from inside, quietly, invisibly, as someone he had loved walked back into his life carrying only truth. "I kept the empire," he said, voice tight, almost pleading. "I kept everything I needed to survive." Sofia took a slow step forward, and he felt the room shrink around him, the distance between them irrelevant. "Everything. Look at you," she said softly. "Do you really think having everyone obey you makes you safe? Makes you whole?" He wanted to argue. He wanted to remind her of the dangers he had faced, the family he had protected, the sacrifices he had made. But her eyes left no room for deflection. They didn't judge. They reflected. And in that reflection, he saw the truth he had refused to name. He had been surviving, yes, but he had never lived. The silence stretched. Neither moved, yet the weight of unspoken words pressed down as heavily as any bullet, any threat, any rival. His empire was intact, but the human cost had arrived quietly, like a messenger without a face, delivering a verdict he could not appeal. Sofia turned toward the door, pausing only to leave the final weight behind. "I didn't come to punish you," she said. "I came to make sure you feel what you've earned. Don't waste it." And then she was gone. Alessandro sank into his chair, the echoes of her presence lingering. The crown remained, heavy and cold, but the cost had finally found him. Not through violence, not through betrayal, but through the clarity of absence, the reckoning of love abandoned. The price came due, and it was more relentless than any enemy he had ever faced. Alessandro sat in the dim light of his office long after Sofia had gone. The city sprawled below like a glittering testament to everything he had built, and everything he had lost. The quiet was deafening. No footsteps, no orders to be given, no threats to meet. Only him, and the space between what he wanted and what he had earned. He had always believed that power could solve everything. That respect, fear, wealth, dominance, they were shields against loss, against regret, against the loneliness he had once feared more than death. But the echo of her words lingered. Do you really think having everyone obey you makes you safe? Makes you whole? For the first time in years, Alessandro admitted the truth to himself. It didn't. Power could build walls, but it could not mend hearts. Could command loyalty, but not love. It could silence enemies, but not the ghost of what he had abandoned. The empire he had fought to preserve, the life he had clawed toward with every ruthless choice, meant nothing if the cost was the one person who had once known him fully, without masks or calculation. He thought of Sofia, the way she had stood, unyielding, in a room that had once been his sanctuary, and made him feel small without ever raising her voice. He realized now that she had always been untouchable to him, not because of fear, but because she represented a part of himself he had buried. The man who could have chosen love over ambition, who could have built a life with someone who understood him, rather than a kingdom that obeyed him. Alessandro leaned back, the chair creaking beneath the weight of revelation. There would be no undoing the past. There would be no reclaiming her trust, no restoring what he had broken. But for the first time he saw a path forward, not as a king cloaked in fear, but as a man stripped to what mattered. Accountability, understanding, Angst. The city lights shimmered below, indifferent to his awakening, and yet he felt an unfamiliar lightness, a release from the illusion that power equaled life. He could not buy back the years, the words unspoken, or the warmth he had forsaken, but he could choose what came next. He could face himself honestly, carry the weight of his choices without hiding behind his name, and perhaps, someday, honor the memory of what had been lost. Alessandro stood, the office suddenly too quiet, too small, and walked to the window, gripping the edge of the sill. The man he had been, the man who abandoned love for dominance, was gone, replaced by someone capable of seeing the true cost of ambition. Alone, yes, changed certainly, but awake. He whispered into the night, a vow to the empty room and to himself. He would never forget. He would never ignore. And though he could not reclaim what he had lost, he could finally understand that some things, even the crown of an empire, could never buy what truly mattered. For the first time, Alessandro DeLuca felt the weight lift. Not the weight of power, but the weight of denial. He had survived the empire. Now he could begin to survive himself.